Okay, everyone, good morning, good afternoon, wherever this shiur might find you. This is the second to last in the series on the Bnei Rachel, which is capping off the series on all of the Shvatim. And today we're going to continue on with our exploration of the city of Shechem, the city of Yosef, because I found that Shechem was almost the best vehicle for me personally to wrap my mind around this figure in Jewish history and Bible who is both an Abba and a Ben, who both belongs to the pantheon of the Avot as well as the Kadra of the Shvatim. I'm not sure I should call the Avot a pantheon now that I think about it, but belongs to the constellation of the Avot and the constellation of the Shvatim equally. Um, so, where we left off last week in doing not even a full survey of Shechem, of all the places in the Torah and Jewish history where Shechem pops up, but just generally looking at Yosef's intersection with Shechem and his own personal history, his family history with Shechem, with the rape of his sister Dinah, and how his brothers then went and slaughtered all the men and plundered the city, followed by his own sale after trying to achieve some kinds of rapprochement with his brothers. He was sold in Shechem, and then just looking at some other examples of division in Shechem, of disaster in Shechem, which is how our sages arrive at their estimation of this city as a makom mezuman leparanut, a city that is ripe for disaster. And so the question that was lingering was, why is Yosef so attached to Shechem? Or why does our Misorah, our tradition, twin Yosef with this city? I'll to strengthen that question, and I believe that this is the midrash that we ended up with last time. We were looking at this midrash in Shmot Rabbah, where Yosef is saying to his legacy, to his children, to his brothers, to whoever is in Egypt around him on his deathbed, you should bring, I know I'm going to be buried here, embalmed and entombed here in Egypt, but you should remove me when it's your time to leave hundreds of years in the future and to journey back to our ancestral home. You should take my bones along with you. And indeed, this is what Moses does. So the Midrash, after drawing this interesting parable, which we're not going to get into, draws the following lesson. When he was not long for the world, Kishabali patermen ha'olam, hishpia otam, Yosef made his brothers swear. Amar lahem, bevakasha mikem achai, I have a request from you. Mishchem ganavtem oti chai, you stole me alive from the city of Shechem. Hachziru et atzmotai l'Shechem. Return my remains to Shechem. And that is why we have the biblical record recording for us that this is indeed where Yosef is reinterred. That atzmot Yosef asher ha'alu b'nei Yisrael miMitzrayim kavru b'Shechem. We saw that verse last week at the very end of the book of Joshua, that they did make good on the pledge that they had made centuries earlier to their ancestor Yosef, and they buried Yosef in Shechem. So then the question becomes, if this is such an awful place, right? A place of division, not only a place where Dinah was raped and a place where Yosef was sold, but also a place of disastrous breed and slaughter, right? The fallout after the rape of Dinah, where the Shechemites were slaughtered en masse, and where the brit that they had, the covenant that they had thought that they were making with the family of Yaakov, ended up being a faulty covenant. And then last week we also looked at the fact that Shechem is the site of the secession of the Union. It's the site where Rechavam, the son of Shlomo, goes to try and retain the unity of his father's dynasty, but he fails. and Shechem is the city where the Melucha, where the kingdom of Am Yisrael is rendered, split into two, Malchut Yehuda in the south and Malchut Yisrael in the north. And we also saw that it's a place of division of the unity of God, in that later on the Samaritans would claim that region as their holy site, Har Gerizim, which we're going to take a look at in just a few minutes, as one of the mountains looming over the saddle city of Shechem. Shechem sits in the valley between the Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval, and so Har Gerizim is the cultic center of the Samaritans. And we had a look at some of the midrashim in the Yerushalmi, at a midrash in the Yerushalmi, that where Rabbi Yishmael is suggesting that the Samaritans were drawn to this site because this is a site of the interment, I think, is that the right word, of the idols that Yaakov had claimed from his family. So I bring this as an example of Shechem as a site of idolatry, a site where the idols are actually interred into the very ground. He did not destroy them, but he buried them there. And that idolatry will be revisited millennia on, when the Samaritans will start their peculiar form of syncretic worship, where they sync their gods that they brought with them from other lands with the worship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it's considered idolatry, and it's happening in Shechem. So this place in which idols are interred is also the place where Yosef's bones are interred. It just makes the whole situation that much more curious, right? A place of steeped in disaster, idolatry, sexual crime, and death and murder is also the place of Yosef. And so in order to address that imbalance, as it were, and why Yosef, according to this midrash at least, is saying, you must bury me in Shechem. I need to be there, right? I would think you would want to get as far as you could from the scene of the crime that condemned you to the rest of your life in Egypt, right? Why wouldn't you want to be buried, more logically, in Hebron, where your father and grandfather and great grandfather are buried, and your maternal ancestors as well? But no, he wants Shechem, and I believe that the reason hinges on the magnitude of the personality of the place. In that, true, this is a makom zuman leparanut. It's a place that is ripe for disaster, but it is also the place that is identified in the book of Deuteronomy, meaning when the Israelites were still in the desert, they were still on the cusp of entering into the land of Israel, and Moses is giving his last month-long speech before he dies to his people before they enter into the land. And he instructs them, when you go into the land, you are going to have another covenant. We've experienced covenant, he says to his people, 40 years ago at Sinai. We experienced covenant. We're actually experiencing covenant again. Deuteronomy is considered a Mishnah Torah. It's an additional covenant. But you are going to have one more covenant, one more brit. Covenant is the word I choose as a translation for the Hebrew word brit, which really means a relationship, a mutually agreed upon status of a relationship. And that is something that you will only achieve upon entering into Eretz Yisrael. And these are Moshe's words. And he tells us exactly where this brit is going to take place. Ototo, in just a few weeks, you are going to be brought into this land that God has intended for you to inherit. V'natata et habracha al har Gerizim, v'et haklala al har Eval. And you're going to go to this place. You've never been there before, right? And I, Moses, also have never been there before. But this is God's roadmap that he's giving me to give to you, right? Make sure you write it all down, because you don't have Waze, and you're going to have to figure out how to get there. You have to get to this mountain called Har Gerizim, and you have to get to a mountain called Har Eval. And these are well-known landmarks. Now, in case that's not enough, right? The names themselves. that God is giving me to give to you. Here's the map. Hello, Hema be'ever hayarden. They are, just so you can be clear, on the western side of the Jordan River, where you're heading in that direction in just a few weeks. Acharei derech mevo hashemesh. After you've completed your Route 6 trip. Now, I mean, Route 6, that's in Israel, that's the main thoroughfare. After you've gone quite a ways on the main thoroughfare that you are going to be using to enter into the heartland of your promised land, of the land of Israel. Be'eretz HaKnani, it's defined as the land of the Knani, Hayoshev Ba'arava, that dwell in the western side, the Ma'arav, the western, more western stretches than where we are right now. Mul HaGilgal, Eitzel Elone More. I feel like I have like I'm one of the lost boys with a treasure map. And like I have, an X, like where I should be going right now. And if I wasn't as familiar with the land of Israel, then all I have here are just a whole bunch of coordinates, right? I know it's Ever Hayarden. I have to take a highway that's Mevo Derech, means a highway, Mevo Hashemesh, that's called highway Mevo Hashemesh, in the lands of the Canaanites on the west, opposite the Gilgal, near or by Elone More, a place known as Elone More. Now, I have the advantage of familiarity with this area, and so we're going to look at the actual map that we have now, the Tufshin Pei Vav, the 2025 map, so we can actually identify exactly what it is that we're talking about. But getting into the mindset of ancient Israel, when they're told these instructions, there are certain echoes that they hear. Now, Be'eretz HaKnani is something that they've heard before, if they knew their Bible, in that when Avraham Avinu enters into Eretz Yisrael, he is said to go first to Shechem, also known as Elone More, Be'eretz Canaan. In other words, the Canaanite nature of this place is stamped onto the psyche of Am Yisrael very early on. It is identified as Eretz Canaan. This particular place, Shechem, is identified as Eretz Canaan, and it's also interchangeable with Elone More. So Elone More is another name for the area of Shechem, and that will come up again in the stories of Yaakov, when Yaakov returns to Eretz Canaan, and he is also going to Shechem, Elone More. So it's kind of like if you think of places that we've heard of before that are layered, like Hebron is known as Elone Mamre, or Beit El is known as Luz. There are places that have previous identifications and or parallel identifications. I think my father, I think Abba, you're in this year, so I'll give you a shout out now. Like my father, who's a born and bred Baltimorean, will say, Baltimore, the Jerusalem of America. So it's almost like interchangeable, right? So in this case, let's say it would be Shechem is Elone More. And so there's a film, it takes a memory, a collective memory for a nation that has never personally experienced the land, but seems to recall these names in their legends, in their national myth, let's say. Now, let's go and have a good look here. There we go. Okay. Everybody transferred with me to the map here, right? We've seen this map before when we're looking at the area of Menashe, because Shechem sits at the seam line between Menashe and Ephraim. Menashe in the north, Ephraim in the south. And when we were talking about the daughters of Tzlavchad and their ancestral portions, we were looking at roughly this area over here. Okay, Am Yisrael is sitting down here in Arvot Moav, a little bit to the south. Over here, you see my cursor is down here by Karamet, down here. And you see here is the Jordan Valley Rift. This is the dividing line that the Jordan River runs down or ran down in the ancient world between the plains of Moab or the Transjordan area and Eretz Canaan Ma'arav and the Canaanite lands on the west. Now, the Derech Mevo Hashemesh, the route that Am Yisrael should be taking to get to Shechem, is this road right over here. This is called Wadi Farah. And we looked at this road very, very carefully when we were looking at Tirzah. This is the city of Tirzah over here that belonged to the region of the daughter of Tzlavchad, who was known as Tirzah, the first capital city of the Shomron region. And then down here is Shechem, which you see here as Nablus. Nablus, the Roman Neapolis, or it's the Romans named it Neapolis, and the Romans spoke Greek, so it was Neapolis, the new city. But sitting on Tel Balata, which is the biblical Tel that is identified as the biblical city of Shechem. And now if you go to Balata, which no one in this group, I dare say, has ever been to, or I shouldn't say that, maybe some of you have, but cannot access nowadays. Tel Balata is a sprawling and huge refugee camp on the outskirts of Nablus. Now, I want to take a look at some pictures from a slideshow that I put together. Here is the Derech Mebo HaShemesh. So Am Yisrael, when Moshe is speaking to them, are over here, and Yaakov is, when he's journeying from Padan Aram, is coming down this way, and this is a natural way to cross. In the book of Joshua, when the waters of the Jordan are said to have stopped up by Adam, this is Damia here, Adam, right over here, the waters crossed, and Am Yisrael crossed over here. And they would, in order to get to Shechem, the easiest way would have been to have taken what's now Route 57 or Derech Mevo HaShemesh. And if we go back to our description, which I don't have in front of me, but the source sheets, if you have them, the psukim described the location as Acharei Derech Mevo HaShemesh. After you've finished your journey on the road, you will get to Shechem. There's a natural dip here, and that's where you will end up. Now, this is just a different form of the map, but just to show you the path that they would have taken, Derech Mevo HaShemesh up here to Tirzah, and then down to Shechem, which, as you see, sits in the valley between Eval on the north and Grizim on the south. And Moshe is saying, when you get into Eretz Yisrael, hightail it up here, even though the story only happens at the end of the book of Joshua. We're not sure if this is actually one of the first things that the Israelites do upon crossing the Jordan and going into the land of Israel. There's a machloket as to whether this is the first thing they do or whether this happens at a later stage. But here's more of a topographical map where you can see clearly how Moshe's roadmap plays out. This is on my drive. This is what Nachal Tirzah, Wadi Farah looks like now as I'm approaching further west, the inland. I can't say that the Israelites would have seen this, but if you go now in November, December, then all of this is green and gorgeous. Now, here is Shechem. Shechem is sitting between Eval on the north and Grizim on the south. Here's a better picture, more clearer of Shechem. Here's Eval on the north and Grizim on the south. And here is ancient Shechem, Tel Balata, over here. Okay. This is a very old, and I can't say exactly when it was taken, picture of Kever Yosef. And you can see very little around Kever Yosef. And that Kever Yosef was an esteemed and acknowledged landmark and venerated, or at least honored, or at least not, let's say, vandalized by the various different peoples who had lived in Shechem over the course of the thousands of years since Yosef had been buried there. And if you were to ask me, as a tour guide who likes to think that I have a little bit of, let's say, intellectual integrity, I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but if you were to say, Tamar, would you be able to identify what burials in Israel are fairly conclusively proven? Then I would say there are very, very few. In other words, there are very few graves that you can go to where you can conclusively identify those graves as most likely having a very high probability of being the place where the person is actually said to be buried, with a few exceptions. Kever Rambam in Tveria, Marat HaMachpelah in Hebron, not Kever Rachel, which we'll get to next week with Binyamin, and Kever Yosef in Shechem. It seems extremely likely that at least going back to the 4th century Common Era, this site was identified by pilgrims as the site of Yosef's burial. These are quite old pictures, at least 30 years old, from Tel Balata. Here you see a Middle Bronze Age wall. There's massive I don't know if they're still around because there's been so much damage to Shechem over the last 2 years especially. But they used to be massive 8-meter high walls from the Middle Bronze Age period, meaning the period from Avram Avinu, from our Avot. Remember, Avram came to Shechem, to Elon Moreh, Va'kanani az ba'aretz. So this would have been likely the wall that he would have encamped against and seen. This I'll leave I'll return back to that picture in a second. And here would have been the Middle Bronze Age gate, the remains of what we see of a massive gate that would have been part of the fortifications that Abraham would have experienced when he came to Shechem. Let me go back. This is likely the archaeologists date this standing stone to the destruction layer of Shechem in the days of Avimelech. Do you remember last week when we were talking about the history of Shechem? There's a lot of biblical history around Shechem. There's Abraham, there's Yaakov and his family, including Dinah and Yosef. And then there is this story of the Jews, of the Israelites coming into Israel and having this brit in Israel, which we're going to talk about in just a bit. And then last week we talked about what happened in Shechem in the days of Gidon son Avimelech, when there was a Baal brit. There was this syncretistic cult of the Canaanite Baal god and Hakadosh Baruch Hu, which the Israelites in Shechem worshipped as a joint cult. And this is believed to have been from the destroyed temple of Baal Brit. In the Avimelech story in the book of Judges, the temple is set aflame and the whole temple is destroyed. And much of the city of Shechem is destroyed as well. And the archaeologists date this remnant to the temple of Baal Brit. Okay, this just for those who are interested are part of the remains of the Samaritan cultic complex on Har Gerizim. Okay, I want to leave this for a second and go over just for before we get to discussing the Brit and Yosef and continuing with our discussion of Yosef and Shechem. I want to just take a look for a second. What happens if you try to do some research on Shechem? So what we've done up until now is just a glance at the roadmap that Moshe gives Am Yisrael how to get to Shechem, and what archaeology, at least the excavations prior to 30 years ago of Tel Balata had to tell us about Shechem. But if you were to try and go to Tel Balata today or go to Shechem today, then not only would you not be allowed to, because you can only go in with heavy army escort. In fact, the last time that an Israeli was allowed into Shechem was just over a month ago, Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan. If you remember the shiur on around Cheshvan, it was about Menashe and how Menashe, the son of Yosef, is matched with the month of Cheshvan. So it's really the perfect month for Israelis to have been allowed to visit Kever Yosef. They could go under heavily armed escort between the hours of 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. for one night during Rosh Chodesh. Other than that, there is no access to anywhere in Shechem, and the only place they were allowed to go was Kever Yosef. Now, if you were to try and do some research about Shechem then you're going to get to the state of Palestine, the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. In the same way that I hoped to have shown you a couple of shiurim ago when we were talking about Tirzah, biblical Tirzah. You can't just go to Tel El Farah and start digging around there, or start exploring there, or researching there, because it's now under the auspices of the PA, of the Palestinian Authority, who call themselves the State of Palestine Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. If I told you that Shechem is one of the primary cities of the Bible, then you'd be hard pressed to find that on this site, because here, if you read their description, Shechem, the Canaanite city, Tel Balata, there is not one reference to Israel. There is not one reference to the Bible. And if you were to look at a related video put out by the Nablus Museum, I don't know if it's under the auspices of the State of Palestine's Ministry of Archaeology and Tourism, but I watched almost this entire video, 1 minute short of watching this entire video, which surveys the history of Shechem, actually does a pretty nice job with some interesting graphics and a nicely produced video. Not one mention of the stories of the Bible. Now, I understand historically one can say, well, there's no way to prove that Avram was in Shechem or that Yaakov was in Shechem. But I'll tell you this, from the archaeological record, you could definitely prove that Avimelech was in Shechem, and you could definitely prove that Shechem was destroyed by Yehoshua, as is recorded for us in Yehoshua Perek Yud Gimel. And you can prove also that Shechem was an Israelite city from the period of the monarchy, when Rechavam went up to Shechem to negotiate. What I'm saying here is that a big chunk of Shechem's history is missing, and so it's part of my responsibility, I feel, and actually our duty to make sure that that part doesn't get dismissed and obliterated in this cesspool of misinformation about Shechem. That's how, we should feel passionate about these sites that seem to quickly be disappearing from the Jewish from the world narrative that are really our sites and are part of our Masorah as well. Okay, so getting back to our sources here. Elohim be'ever hayarden, they are on the western side of the Jordan. Acharei derech mevo hashemesh, after you've done that whole route that we were just exploring, Beretz HaKanaani, don't forget that Shechem is a Canaanite city, or it's part of our traditions. Moshe is saying that this is a Canaanite stronghold, Hayoshev Ba'araba, that dwell on the western side, Mul HaGilgal Etzel Elonei Moreh, opposite the Gilgal by Elonei Moreh, and I'll talk about that in just 1 second, the Gilgal, because Gilgal is a very important feature within the landscape of Eretz Israel geography, but also Gilgal is the first site that Bnei Yisrael went to when they crossed the Jordan. It's their first cultic site. It's where they first gave thanksgiving to God and performed a Brit Milah and brought the Karban Pesach, all of these in Gilgal. And this is in somehow the vicinity or opposite Shechem. Now, we'll get to that in a bit, but I just want to get to some of the meat and make sure that I answer the question about Yosef and Shechem. Taking a look here at Rashi, Rashi points out something that I might have, you might all, I haven't looked at the comments, you might have stopped me and you're like, wait a second, Tamar. Moshe's not talking about Shechem. Nowhere did Moshe say the city of Shechem. Rather, he pointed to Har Grizim and Har Eval. And so Rashi says, this is true, right? Rashi's like, Rashi wants us to put all our cards on the table. But Rashi points out, the Pasuk does say Elonei Moreh, and we've heard of Elonei Moreh before. So while the Pasuk doesn't say it's actually Shechem, Rashi says Shechem hu. We're talking about doing this brit in Shechem. Shneemar ad makom Shechem ad Elon Moreh. Because the precedent in Genesis 12, when Abraham came into the land for the first time, he came to Shechem, to Elon Moreh. So because Moshe is telling us, go to Elon Moreh, then we are talking about Shechem. Further along in his end of life speech in Dvarim, Moshe says, I told you to go to this place back in chapter 11. Now we're in chapter 27 of my book, and I want to tell you exactly what you're supposed to do in this place. You're going to go to Har Grizim and Har Eval, and you're going to divide the tribes. Ele Yamdu Levarecha Ta'amal Har Grizim. There will be 6 tribes perched on Har Grizim, and that is where the nation will be blessed. Ve'ele Yamdu Al Klala B'Har Eval, and the 6 other tribes will stand on Har Eval, and that is where the nation will be cursed. By the way, as I mentioned last week, Har Grizim, also known as Har Bracha, it would be natural for the Samaritans to have identified that place as a place of blessing and as a place of holiness, because it was the site of the bracha. And this is the brit that you are supposed to do there. It's called the brit bracha v'klala, the covenant of blessing and curse, very broadly. And let's explore exactly what the brit is that Am Yisrael do when they get into Eretz Yisrael, specifically in Shechem. Yoshua, in the end of his book, discusses this event, this tableau. Vayichrot Yoshua brit la'am bayom hahu, vayasem lo chok u'mishpat b'Shechem. Yoshua forges this covenant with the nation in Shechem. Vayichtov Yoshua tadvarim ha'ela. He writes down these words of the Brit, which we assume are the brachot and klalot, or portions of Dvarim, b'sefer Torat Elokim, vayikach even from Dvarim, from Sefer Dvarim, vayikach even gedola vayikimeha sham tachat ha'ela asher b'mikdash Hashem, and he inters yet another element into the land of Shechem. We have the bones of Joseph interred there. We have the idols of Yaakov's family interred there. And now we have the Torah of this Brit, the record of this covenant that is forged by Yehoshua between Am Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Eretz Yisrael. And Rashi wants us to pay close attention to Tachat Ha'elah. Don't think that this is just some kinds of a geographical description. No, in the exact same place where Yaakov had buried the idols, that is where Yehoshua plants the Torah. It's very evocative. It's probably the most second to Hebron, or maybe the foundation stone on Har Moriah. This idea of the land itself containing these elements, and very paradoxical elements. The element of the Torah, which unites and draws us into relationship, and the element of idolatry, which divides and fractures the unity of God, interred in the same exact space. And that is the glory and the gadlut and the danger of Shechem. It's also the glory and the gadlut and the danger of Yosef, that these are extremely momentous places and people who have great potential for disaster, but also for building. And now I'm focusing on the building of this, of the togetherness, of relationship, of love. Ela divrei habrit. These are this is the brit that you are meant to do when you get into Eretz Yisrael. This is the second brit that's being discussed here. Remember, I mentioned there were 3 britot according to the Mechilta. There's the brit at Sinai. There's the covenant at Sinai. There's the covenant in Arvot Moav that this verse is describing here in the book of Dvarim. That's the covenant between Moshe and Bnei Yisrael. And the third covenant is on Har Grizim and Har Eval. The third binding, the third pact, the third what's that expression when you renewal of vows, right? But it's not just a renewal of vows. It's like a relationship. It's infusing a relationship with new elements and a freshness that it hadn't had before, a new brit. One Bnei Yisrael entered into Eretz Yisrael. And I want to talk about this brit in Shechem, what the nature of this brit was, and how it was different than the previous two covenants that Israel had made with God. The nature of this brit is described in this verse. Hanistarot la'Hashem Elokeinu v'haniglaot lanu ulevanenu ad olam. The hidden matters are for God alone, but the revealed matters are for us and our descendants for perpetuity, for all time. Now, in the Masoretic text, there are dots on top of lanu ulevanenu. Just like we discussed last week, lirot et sonam. There were dots placed on top of that word lirot, or was it lirot et? When the brothers had gone up to Shechem from Hebron to coddle themselves, right? Ostensibly to shepherd their sheep, but it's really to shepherd themselves and to figure out, their own sense of self-worth over and against Yosef. But lanu levanenu, in this verse in Deuteronomy, also has these dots, these Masoretic signposts for us that are meant to indicate something. V'al ayin shebe'ad, and also on top of the ayin in ad olam. Melamed, what is the tradition that we have that is embedded within this visual cue of the nikud on top of lanu levanenu ve'ad? Shalo anash al hanistarot ad she'avru Yisrael et hayarden, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That Bnei Yisrael reached a new level of responsibility, a new level of obligation once they entered into Eretz Yisrael that they hadn't been responsible for up until this point. Prior to entering into Eretz Yisrael, it was each man and his zchuyot and his chataim, each man and his own merits and his own sins, and that is what stood him in either in good stead or in disgrace in God's eyes. Once Israel enters into Eretz Yisrael, we achieve a level of arevut, of hadadiyut. These are words that speak of mutual obligation, mutual responsibility. If you remember, when Yericho was destroyed and then it was declared cherem, it couldn't be spoiled at all. And then Achan, one of the leaders of the tribe of Yehuda, despoils the city, and in retaliation or as a response, the army of Israel is damaged in their subsequent fight against the city of Ai, and the message that is learned from that whole episode is that Achan's sin was a sin that the entirety of Israel bore, because everyone was responsible to root out the rot. That there's a mutual responsibility that's a historic moment for Israel that never leaves us. From that moment that the Israelites entered into the land of Israel and went up to Shechem and performed that brit, and it's the brit of arevut, this brit of the sins that are hidden that my neighbor does, I bear responsibility for, because I live in a land of heightened sensitivity, I guess is an appropriate word. I live in a land where I am meant to interact not only with God and the land, but with my fellows in a way where I am sensitive to their pain, where I am sensitive to their needs, where where we preserve our morality, we preserve our values mutually as a society. And that is the brit that was enacted in Shechem, this brit of mutuality. Now, how fitting is it that in the place of disaster, the place that is so highlighted by friction, by fratricide, by rending asunder, by division, that this is also the place of unity, where you have the symbol of division, the idols of the household of Jacob, interred in the exact same spot as the symbol of a unified Israel, the terms of the new brit of arevut, of mutuality, both interred tachat ha'ela asher b'Shechem. Why is this? I have a few suggestions. One suggestion I bring you here. Why Shechem? I mean, why specifically Shechem? And here are my suggestions. I'm just quoting to you here from an article that I wrote a couple of years ago. The landscape around Shechem encouraged Brit. The landscape is its own language, and people are drawn to landscape because it answers something in them, or they want something with, or they have she'ifot, they have aspirations that they feel the landscape can answer. And the landscape of Shechem is very particular. Two mountains bisected by a plain with the Holy Ark nestled between them. It's similar to the halved animals in the Brit Bein HaBetarim. You remember the brit of Avram Avinu, right? When he cut the animals in half and created a center aisle and the divine smoke and fire that passed between them, right? Now, staged as a redo of Sinai, the tableau around Shechem was deliberately inverted. This time, instead of gazing up at God from the foot of Mount Sinai, Israel will be divided between the two mountaintops looming over Shechem, half the tribes on Mount Gerizim, half on Har Eval. From their superior vantage points, Israel would peer down at the Ark of the Covenant set in the land. Within the ancient storied city of Shechem, Shechem would serve as their focal point of contemplating the promised land and their new responsibilities and obligations towards one another, completing the circle that Abraham had begun at the very outset when Shechem was the first city that he came to. Now, I owe this insight to Professor Yoel Elitzur, who noticed the inverse nature of the Brit at Shechem over and against Har Sinai, when all of Am Yisrael were around the mountain looking up, and now we are all on the mountain looking down. Okay, so that is one suggestion where the landscape itself of Shechem lends itself to this particular Brit. But now I want to circle back to Yosef, because there's that third element that is interred in Shechem, not just the idols and of Yaakov's family, and not just the brit that Yehoshua forges between Am Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but also the bones of Yosef. So why is this? I'm going to look now at, is this the Sakachava of Shem Shmuel? I don't remember. I'm not very good at remembering the dynasties of the Hasidic rabbis. But the Shem Shmuel, I think the 19th century, talks about this Shechem Mezuman Leparanut, talks about this idea of how Shechem is such a disastrous place, but also such a wonderful place. He's like, this is really the only way to understand what our sages were saying, to Shechem Makom Mezuman Leparanut, that Shechem is a place that is ripe for disaster. L'chora, it seems crazy. Halo Shechem hu echad hamekomot be'Eretz Yisrael. How can you say such a thing about a place in Eretz Yisrael? More than that, Shechem is a place that the nations of the world can't even claim. There are three places that were purchased fair and square, one can say, in the biblical record. Right? The first one is Hebron, where Avram purchases the fields of Ephron Achiti that had Ma'arat HaMachpelah in it. The second is Shechem, where Yaakov purchases areas around Shechem. And the third is Har HaBayit, when David HaMelech purchases the threshing floor on Har HaBayit. As history, ironically, would have us, would play out, these are the three most contested places, probably, in the contemporary land of Israel: Hebron, Shechem, Nablus, and the Temple Mount. But the Shem Shmuel here is saying that these are three places. This is a place that shouldn't even enter into a discussion as to, it's not disputed territory, right? It was purchased by Yaakov Avinu. Beyond that, that it is a city of refuge for accidental murder, for those who commit manslaughter. The Yaakov nadal Yosef matana, and Yaakov gave him a Shechem echad al achecha. Yaakov gave him the city of Shechem. Can we possibly speak ill about a place like this, that it is a place that's ripe for disaster? But if you've been paying attention, the Shem Yishmael says, we've been saying this all along, Shahid chalkut v'hapirud bein hashvatim hayu lerov ma'alatam. That when the tribes went up, left Hebron to go and shepherd themselves and coddle themselves and discover who each one was as an individual, this is the place where that could best happen. Shechem is the place where you can discover who you are. Because perhaps, the Shem Yishmael doesn't say this, but perhaps because of the nature of the place that was determined by Shimon and Levi when they forced the Canaanites' realization of the might and sovereignty of Israel, right? Where when they established the fear that this small band of the Yaakov's family should have, that it engendered within the peoples of the land, perhaps that laid the groundwork for future iterations of Shechem's disaster, but also why we're drawn to Shechem to discover who we are, who I am over and against you, what my tribe brings to the table over and against your tribe. Zeu enyan atzmo b'Shechem. Shechem is called a part, right? That's what the word means. It means a chelek. It means a part. Shemachmat godel ma'alat hamakom hu me'orer b'yoshvav ma'alat hatzura liot nechshav b'tzura shleima mepnei atzmo. That because this is a place with such tremendous potential, it causes its inhabitants or people who go there to focus on who each one is. What am I over and against the whole? And that inevitably causes division. Because if I am determining who I am over and against you, then we're not drawing together. I'm just establishing who I am over and against you. This is very much the hallmark of Yosef. This is early Yosef, right? When Yosef would go and say, hey, brothers, listen to what I dreamt. Listen to my dreams for myself. Listen to how you're all different than me. Listen to how I stand at the center and you all bow to me. Even our parents bow to me. This is very much Yosef. This is a core of self-identity, of charisma, of knowing who you are over and against the other. Now, let's continue on with the Shem Yishmael. Shechem hu milashon chelek. Shechem, the word itself means a portion, a part of. I'm giving you one additional portion, Yosef, Yaakov says to his son, over and against your brothers. That the place that is called a part, a chelek, a portion, causes its inhabitants to have an arrogance that I am better than you. I am different than you. That everyone is his own individual portion, and he will not subsume or submit before the whole. And that is what our sages say about Shechem, that it is a place that is ripe for disaster. It's impossible, Shem Yishmael says, that we're just going to leave it like that and think of Shechem as a place that is only disastrous. It is true that this is a place that causes the inhabitants to feel separate from each other, to focus only on their own self. V'itavle tavmine, v'imbishlet bishmine. And if it's a good thing, then there's nothing better than that. But if it's a bad thing, there's nothing worse than that. And what do I mean by that? I'd like to unpack that sentence for a second. Pardon my use of the word unpack. I don't like using that word. This is a a truism about the nature of Am Yisrael. And and seeing as though we're rounding out the shiurim on the tribes, it's a good time to discuss this. And that is that Am Yisrael is a confederate of 12 distinct tribes. The greater each tribe, the greater the whole. Malchut, the system of differentiated parts working in harmony together, is only as great as the greatness of each of those individual parts. So a malchut of humanity will, of course, surpass a malchut of a bee colony, because each human is infinitely more complex and more glorious than a bee. And so the unity of a malchut of Am Yisrael is only as successful as the integrity and the glory of each of its individual tribes. So Shechem is a place where we celebrate tribalism, we celebrate each success and triumph and achievement of the potential of each of the individual tribes, because once we reach that, once a tribe has achieved success, then he can successfully partner with the other tribes. And that's the dual nature of Am Yisrael. We are a unified nation made up of distinct tribes. We're in the same phenomenon, the same social construct now as we always have been, a nation built of distinct tribes. And when each of those tribes can mature into its achievements and into its full potential, then he can join within Am Yisrael in harmony of Malchut, which is this dream of the Brit Hadadiyut, of the Brit Arevut, of the Brit of mutual responsibility. I can be responsible for someone else if I am true to who I am, and I stand strong for who I am. And so it requires the individual or the tribal fulfillment of potential in order to reach the national fulfillment of potential. And so here's where Yosef comes in, because Yosef is both. Yosef is the absolute fulfillment of the individual potential, where he had all the potential in the world. He had the chen, the charisma of a natural leader, but he also was the one who is responsible for drawing all of Am Yisrael together into a united vision for Am Yisrael. We talk about the Mashiach ben Yosef as the Messiah that is responsible for the ingathering of the Jewish people back into Eretz Yisrael, for the Kibbutz Galuyot. It is under his tenure, her tenure, or this period of Kibbutz Galuyot in the eyes of Chazal, that the Mashiach ben Yosef, the Koach of Yosef, will dominate. The koach of being able to draw together as each tribe in Israel realizes its potential. And so, of course, Yosef has to be in Shechem, because Yosef is both the patriarch of individuality and he is the patriarch of Malchut. He is the first Melech. He is the first Melech, meaning Rachel, the offspring of Rachel, formed the beginning of Malchut. They're the first kingdom. Shaul from Binyamin, from Rachel, is the first kingdom. Malchut, Mashiach ben Yosef comes before Mashiach ben David from Leah. This has to happen first. So Shechem is this place where Yosef is buried, because he can draw together the disparate elements of Am Yisrael in his vision. Remember, though his dreams initially wrested Am Yisrael apart and drew Am Yisrael apart, eventually they were realized, and Am Yisrael drew together under his leadership. And so I'll just we'll end with this Tzidkad HaTzadik. And for those who would like to stay, I can talk a little bit about Gilgal because I love talking about Gilgal. But if you have to go, then I understand. But the Rav Tzadok Cohen Melublin has a beautiful teaching that we'll listen to a little bit of a snippet of a song that I think expands on this teaching. Be'et kishalon ha'adam, when man fails, when Yosef's in the pit, when he's in jail, yet he should know that is the very same time that he can turn things around for himself. When you recognize the flaw within you, then you realize that that's also your strength. If you are someone who gets angry easily, realize that you're also someone who is passionate, and that it's the same koach that can be in Shechem, that can be a disaster, or can bring to the Brit Arevut. If he merits at that time, when he realizes how much he has sinned, or how lowly he is, or how terrible this trait is that he sees within himself, then he can realize that this is what he can turn around to raise into his greatest triumph. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. The bigger they fall, the greater heights they can reach. And then everything that he had thought would be for bad can be turned for good. And I'll just I can't go without a little bit of Yosef Karduner, like I was mentioning last week. Listen to a little bit of his song. Yosef Karduner is saying to us, Linyan hitchaskut, regarding growing stronger, lest somebody fall into a big morass. So because of all of the things that he has ruined, all of the disasters that he has brought about, it could cause him to fall into a great darkness. Mata ma'amin sheyicholim lekalkel, hamin sheyicholim letaken. If you believe that you can ruin, then believe that you can fix. That was Yosef HaTzadik, who brought Am Yisrael to the brink of ruin many times, but also is the only one who can fix the divisions within Am Yisrael. So that is my shiur. I will go to any questions now, and then for those who would like to stay, I have about 3 to 5 minutes on Gilgal, which is just for those who like biblical geography and archaeology. Okay, let's go to a question. First, I'll go to the written questions. Shalom from Steilan. It's nice to see you in Aventura. Is there a difference between a covenant and a contract in terms of the Hebrew brit? I think brit, very narrowly, biblically, I shouldn't say that. I don't know this for 100%. I would say brit generally means a covenant. It means rather than some kinds of like a legal document, it means a mutually agreed upon relationship between parties that would be a great breach if broken, as opposed to a contract. My pleasure, Kathy. Okay, Suri. Just wait, you're muted.
Okay, did I just unmute?
Yeah.
Okay. So I studied for many years with Rabbi David Silber from Drisha, and he was fond of calling Shechem, like we call Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. And he called it that because despite the disaster that happened in Shechem, it was the place where Shimon and Levi and rallied all the brothers together to avenge what happened to Dinah. And at the end, you know, when Yaakov challenges them and they say, Hakazonah yaset achatenu, that was the place. It could have been the city of brotherly love. And when Yaakov sends Yosef to Shechem, it's partly with that in mind. Like, this is a place that I saw all my sons rally together for one of my other children. I'm hoping that they'll all rally together for Yosef. And the sad part is that when Yosef gets there, the man tells him that they've gone. And Rabbi Silver always speculates that had they still been there could have been a reconciliation, because that's what Shechem stood for. So, yes, of course, we can't negate all the other things that Shechem stood for, but that sort of consonant with part of the yes, outlook that you were presenting.
It's a place that's always trying for Brit, always trying to get it right, and almost always falling short. I mean, there are moments when it doesn't fall short, like, Kever Yosef or the Brit Arevut, are moments of success. But like, in case I didn't stress this enough, it's always Brit that goes bad there, right? It's the Brit Milah in Shechem. It's the it's the Baal Brit with Avimelech. And it's and Brit is the hallmark of Yosef. Yosef is the figure who remains steadfast, loyal, and trustworthy, right? He holds to the Brit even when tempted away from Brit. So
that's why it's so significant that he's buried there, because even though he missed the brothers the first time around, now he ends up back there. And just derech agav, the Shem Yishmuel is the son of Rav Avraham of Sokachev.
Okay, but I was right with the Sokachev. Right. Okay.
And one other thing, if you don't mind, in terms of, I was connecting the phrase of Haniglot Lanu Hanistarot Lashem Elokeinu with the fact that when the first klalot, not the whole slew of them, but just the first one, Arur, 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 are given to be told to Bnei Israel on Har Gerizim, they're all things that people generally do in secret. And even the first one, where it says that it's Avodah Zarah, and I'm thinking, well, that's not in secret, but it says specifically that they do it baseter.
Wow.
And all the other things, the sexual things, the masig vul, these are things that the giving of a bribe, those are all things you can do sneakily and nobody will ever know them.
Right.
So in some ways, I think that's connecting to this.
I don't think it's even in some ways. It has to connect. There has to be a unity of ideas in order for something to be true. So if we are going to say that this is that Hanistarot Lashem Elokeinu v'Niglot Lanu Levanenu Ad Olam, right? V'Niglot is like, the Lanu Vanenu Ad Olam. If Chazal are saying that this Brit is going to be a Brit of responsibility, even for those things that we don't see, then the terms of the Brit are going to have to articulate that. Then yes, you're right. I didn't think to look there, which would have been the best place to look at the terms themselves, right? At what was being said there. But if what is being said are things that generally, well, how can you hold me responsible for what someone from Naphtali does, right? I'm from Yisachar, right. But yeah.
Right. It's Avodah Zarah v'sam baseter. It's hitting one of your parents, makle v'vimo, masig vul, mashke iver baderech, matem mishpat ger v'yatom, shochev v'meishet aviv, shochev v'kol behema, shochev v'machoto, shochev v'chotanto, makereyehu basater, it says specifically, and then taking shochad.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All right, Sima, you have.
Hi. First of all, this is amazing. Even more so for me because I just came back from Israel and I had the opportunity to take a tour with IDF support of Sabastia and Peduel and Har Gerizim.
Wow.
So this is just
so Peduel I get because it's a Jewish community, right? And Har Gerizim also, there's like good, but like Sebastia, they're starting to open it again. For those who remember from last week, 2 weeks ago, with Menashe, Sebastia is Shomron, the biblical city of Shomron, and it's hugely important, right? After Tirzah, the capital city, was in the days of Omri, the capital was moved from Tirzah to Shomron, this new city he built. Yes,
and we had gone right after your shir on Benot Tzlachta, so I had all this information in my head, and it was amazing. But just standing on Har Gerizim and looking down onto Shechem, and now hearing all the background and the importance of it that you just described is incredible. I had a visual of it interesting that the Shvatim with their brachot and klalot are standing on two mountains looking down on Yosef. It's almost like looking down into a pit. Wow. And I think that they're their brothers again looking down into a pit, but it's time for them to, be part of a Brit.
So rather tie that back into what Suri was saying earlier, which was
that's because we're sisters, so we think.
Oh, okay. So from Rabbi Silber's insights there, right? Like it's like you're like it's a chance to revisit and to make a tikkun for that which went wrong, right? Like it's an extension of that.
It's amazing to be able to stand there and see Shem and see Elon Moreh.
Yeah.
Right across. It's right there. I have a cousin
let's
who lives
do a Torah in
there.
motion. Let's do a Torah in motion day in Shevet Menashe. I'd love to get there.
Thank you. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Bekif. And I just also want to say, and I know I'm almost like beating this dead horse to death, but let's pay very close attention to what goes out in the media about Tel Shechem, Tel Balata, because they are erasing, and Tel El Farah, Tirza, they're just erasing us from our land. And that's a big, I know these are the kind of crimes, the silent things that go unstated, because there's a lot of things that we should be talking about as a nation. But I don't want a generation to go and then, and then all we're left with is the Palestinian state's record of Shechem. We have to keep that. It's an important element to our national plan. Yes. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Wait, sorry, your hand is still up?
But no, sorry. Whoa.
Okay. So I'm going to get to Gilgal very quickly. Okay. Now, Gilgal, if you recall, the context for Gilgal in today's shiur was that's part of the roadmap that Moshe Rabbeinu had given to Am Yisrael. Mul Gilgal. Now, what does it mean, Mul Gilgal? Well, would it surprise you to note, let me get my little slideshow going here. Okay. We're getting back to Gilgal, yes. Normally when we think of Gilgal, right, we think of Am Yisrael over here in Avel Shittim, the Arvot Moab, the plains of Moab, when Moshe Rabbeinu was giving his speech to them in Tvarim, and then they cross the Yericho over here, and Gilgal, I mentioned, was the first place that they get to, and that's where they begin their service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Eretz Yisrael. And I had mentioned that Damya, or Adam, Gesher Adam here, this is Derech Mevo HaShemesh up here to get to Shechem. So the waters stopped here, and Am Yisrael crossed over here. So what does it mean, Mul Gilgal, Shechem, Etzel Elonei Moreh? Mul Gilgal. Gilgal is if it's close to Yericho, which we would expect it to be, because Yericho is the first city that Am Yisrael conquers in Eretz Yisrael. We would not expect it to be close to Shechem. Shechem is quite distant and far and not visible from Yericho. So there's a phenomenon that was not, I'm taking us back to Derech Mevo HaShemesh, right? This is the Damya Bridge, Adam, right over here. There's a phenomenon in Eretz Yisrael, in the geography of the Transjordan, of the Jordan Valley, that was noticed by Adam Zartal. He was the archaeologist who was charged after the 6-Day War to do a survey of the lands of Menashe, and lower down in the Jordan Valley. And as he was surveying, an archaeological survey is when you get your team together and you don't dig, but you walk every square meter of the land just to make sure that you understand what potentially might be there, right? If you see sherds of pottery, or if you see interesting stone formations, or you need to make sure that everything is charted. By the way, if you're interested, go to the Antiquities Authority website and you can see and read these different surveys. So what he suggested, right? He's like, well, here's Shechem up here. And this again is the journey that Yaakov takes and up and Am Yisrael will take to get to Shechem, Derech Mevo HaShemesh. What he suggested is that, surprisingly, he found about a half a dozen of these formations. What does that look like to you? Oh, looks like a shoe, right? Like a foot. Can you make that out? Right? It's
Oh,
like a standing stone formation. It's like the imprint of a foot,
Yeah.
right? Can you see? Now, it's not one, it's not two, it's six. Okay. And some of them are in better condition than others. The one that we're looking at here, where you can see the outside of the foot, and then you can see an interior worship area. Zartal suggests this is what we mean by Gilgal, where Gilgal also carries with it the connotation of rounded stones, right? Or stones forming some kind of a rounded formation. And so Bnei Yisrael, when they went into Eretz Yisrael, didn't go to a place called Gilgal. They built Gilgal. They built these cultic centers for them to worship in different locations, mostly in the Transjordan. These are archaeological excavations of this one in particular, which is by Kibbutz Argaman, shows that it dates to the Late Bronze Iron One period, which is the time of the Israelite conquest. Now, here I'm just going to show you a little bit of a video. So you can see what it looks like from the ground, where it doesn't look like much. But if you do an aerial view and you can pull up, then you can see this really strange formation as the topography is going from flat up to the more mountainous regions. Seems to be some kinds of like a cultic center. Now, this is where he found the different footprints. One, like I said, was by Argaman. One's by Masua, Yafit. Now, in Shechem is over here. Okay. This is Wadi Farah. Up here, you see Tel Damia. Shechem is over here. So Mul Gilgal, it might not be the Gilgal down here by Yericho. It might be an alternative Gilgal that was actually much closer to Shechem. This is the most recently excavated Gilgal. That's just to the more to the west of Yericho. It's Gilgal Rimonim. But can you see how they all more or less create a foot-shaped or a shoe-shaped space on the landscape? Take a look at perhaps why. Hold on one second. Wait a second. I just have to move this. Moshe speaks to Am Yisrael. Wherever your foot will walk, that will, everywhere where your foot treads shall be yours, right? No man shall stand up to you. Hashem will put the fear of you on the whole land in which you set foot. Asher tidrechuba. Now, perhaps Zartal suggests that the reason why it was a foot shape is to signify we have arrived, we are claiming. There are other times in the biblical description where when you claim sovereignty or when you claim rule over an enemy king, then Yeshua put his foot on the enemy king's neck, right? Like you stamp on the land, you stamp on your enemy, you imprint yourself into the land. So that is perhaps what Mul Gilgal Etzel Elenu Moreh actually means in close vicinity of one of these Gilgal shapes. Yes.
Oh, so Tamar,
Yeah.
are you aware of Raviel ben Nun's understanding of these footprints?
I read about it, but I don't remember. I don't. Yeah,
I love it. So
okay.
he sees these scatter. He thinks there's more than the ones that we've found, but
Yeah.
he feels that they are the regel, the foot of the regalim. These are the places where they set up the Mishkan, where the center of the Mishkan is the Aron, which is
Okay.
the Hadom Raglav. It is the footstool of Hashem. These footprints are the footprint of, we'll say it anthropomorphically, of Hashem. this is where his Mishkan is. And they Mishkan moved around. Wherever they moved it, they made this around it. So,
Right.
and you
Because
come,
I'm sorry,
you
just to
come,
cut you off. When you said that when the Mishkan was in Gilgal, right? For the first
yes,
14 years, it was in Gilgal,
yes,
right? Before it was moved to Shiloh.
it could
So,
be anywhere.
right.
Right,
Which Gilgal, right? It was in,
right.
right.
It was
Wow.
in its Gilgal. And then so you are, when you are, Ole Regel, you're going to one of these footprints where the
One of these
Mishkan is. And then, yeah, wherever
That's amazing.
wherever the Mishkan is.
So I did not read that because I think that would have stuck with me. But I thought I had read something that he wrote on Gilgal. But thank you for
Oh,
that.
yeah, but that because I've heard him talk about it,
That's
and
beautiful.
he's still talking about it. And the
Yes.
Hadom Rag love, I like that. As soon as you started talking about a human foot on the, expressing sovereignty, what this is it's a divine footprint.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I have one last picture for you. This is not Gilgal. This is in the Golan. But this is Ruja Malchiri, and it's much, much older than the Gilgals that we have, on the western side of the Jordan. And this isn't shaped like a foot or a shoe, but it does have the advantage of being round, right? Like Gilgal, almost like so early on, before they had the advantage of these aerial photographs and Zartal did his survey, they thought that maybe this was a Gilgal, even though geographically it didn't make much sense. But it does. There must be, like, I'm really not up on this, but I know, like, Stonehenge, like, there are places throughout the world where this idea of worship in the round, right, is an entrenched idea.
Yeah.
So,
Standing stones in a circle is
in
like
a circle.
old. But
Right.
somehow the Jewish version of it is not just a circle, it's a footprint, the regel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. Wonderful. Yes, sorry. You're muted again. Nope, still muted. Yeah.
Okay, it did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so when I first looked at these footprints, it did look like a footprint to me, but it also did look like two circles, which is where we were just sort of talking about. And I just wanted to speculate that at the end of this week's Parsha Vayetze, when Yaakov and Lavan make a brit, they make it on it's Eid Hagal Hazeh. The word Gal comes 7 times, so maybe that's like the first precedent for a brit being made in the context of some kind of circular formation.
Gal Aid. Right. Yes. Gal Aid. And
I'm not even counting how many times the word Galade is used, but just the word Gal itself appears 7 times.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, it must. A Gal Aid seems to be like a circular, something with stones in a circular formation, which would have, been their symbol of like lasting brit.
Right.
So yeah.
So even these footprints, to me, they look like two conjoined circles.
Interesting. Yeah. There was obviously no written, nothing archaeologically found there other than the ability to date these to the Iron One period. But anyway, I bid you all a good night and a great day. And next week, Bezrat Hashem, our last shiur in the Shvatim series. Be well, everyone.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
Good night.